So what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that the family is based on marriage, that's the present wording, or on other durable relationships. So these things called durable relationships would be raised up to the same constitutional level as marriage. But while everybody can say what a marriage is, and when a marriage ends, nobody seems to know exactly what a durable relationship is. Like, what is that when it's at home?
David
Okay.
Quinn, it's such a joy to talk to you again. You, for those of you who don't know, and most people surely will, you're a very well-known Irish commentator and journalist. You've written lots of stuff. You've presented lots of stuff. You're often seen on the TV in Ireland, and indeed, you're the chief exec of the Iona Institute, which promotes marriage and religion in society. And we're talking today about a couple of referendums which are about to take place in Ireland.
I think most people in Ireland don't really know there's a referendum going on.
Really?
It's fallen under the radar so far. It's only kind of the political junkies like me who are really paying attention.
And do you think it's under the radar simply so people don't turn out and vote in their droves and say, well, this is ridiculous?
No, I don't. I think it's because there hasn't been a long lead-in campaign like for the abortion one, and there hasn't been a long lead-in one like for same-sex marriage, and there aren't really major heavyweight campaigning groups behind either of them. Uh, but there's not the same enthusiasm even from the other side this time because they're just not as symbolically or substantively as important as the previous two.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it kind of is in many ways, isn't it, really?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, serious as paving the way to abortion.
Highlight for us what's going on in what sort of time frame?
Okay. Well, some of your viewers or listeners might remember Ireland has had a few very major referendum campaigns in the last few years. So the most recent one was in 2018, and that was to repeal the pro-life clause in the Constitution, the Eighth Amendment, as it was called. And this paved the way for an abortion regime fairly like the one in Britain. And the abortion numbers have been going up ever since, which is always what happens. So that was one of the major referendum campaigns in recent years. And then 3 years before that, in 2015, we redefined marriage to allow same-sex couples to marry. And both of those referendums passed by a big margin. So this is all kind of part of how Ireland is transforming into a quote-unquote normal modern country and shaking off quote-unquote this kind of Catholic Christian past. And a big target for all these referendum campaigns are the parts of the Constitution that they think still bear too many of the hallmarks of, the once Catholic sort of dominated country that we were. So they have two more targets in their sights from the Constitution. So one talks about mothers in the home. And it says that no mother should be forced out of the home by economic necessity. So this goes back to the 1937 Constitution, when we were actually a very Catholic country. So this is deemed sexist, and we must get rid of it and replace it with a provision that talks about carers, not mothers, carers, not women, deletes the reference to the home, deletes the reference to protecting the mother from being forced out of the home in order to help make ends meet.
Let's just clarify with that.
Yeah,
There's nothing
yeah.
in the Constitution saying that mothers must stay at home. They don't have to, but it's saying that if they want to, they shouldn't be forced out of the home through economic consequences.
Well, as you know, like we get constant lectures these days about misinformation. And as far as I'm concerned, what that particular provision in the Constitution is all about is being completely misrepresented and mischaracterized by the likes of the government, by the opposition parties, because as usual, they're all on the same side. I mean, I always say Ireland is a multi-party but one ideology state. So as usual, social issues, they're all absolutely behind each other. So anyway, it's been mischaracterized by the government, by the opposition parties, and by our state broadcaster RTE as the women in the home provision. And so the line being sold to people is this says a woman's place is in the home, and it doesn't. And a former Chief Justice of Ireland, a woman, Susan Denham, specifically said it does not say a woman's place is in the home. It simply honours the place of mothers, acknowledges the importance of motherhood, and says a mother shouldn't be forced out of home in order to make ends meet. So that's really what it's all about, but it's been completely misrepresented and mischaracterized. So if people go into the polling stations on March the 8th and it's in their heads that the Constitution says a woman's place is in the home, then it will pass. The government will get its way. But if opponents of the referendum can get across to ordinary people, no, it's about trying to ensure, even as an aspiration, that a family can live on one income and they both don't have to work and don't have to empty out the house during the day, then I think it'll be defeated. But it's going to be quite challenging to reframe it accurately because of the sheer power of the government, all the so-called non-government organizations they have on their side, which are really government mouthpieces, so the National Council, and they also benefit of RTE effectively campaigning for them.
And before we go on to the next part of the referendum, I mean, on that point, it beggars belief really, because you read books like As Erica Commissar's Being There, which looks at how important it is for mums to spend time with their babies, you know, and that actually it's not a great idea to give economic incentives to separate them because it has repercussions later on in life. And if you look at the stats you quote on the Iona Institute briefings, etc., most mums want to have the opportunity to stay at home with their babies when they're little if they can, and not feel obliged to go out to work. And I think the point you make in that briefing is that it's only provisions like the one that's in place that enable mums to stay at home when they want to. And in fact, economically, they're going to end up being forced out because they won't have the support they currently get.
So the children's minister here, who's the main minister pushing for this, Roderick O'Gorman, his favourite line is, a woman's place is wherever she wants it to be. Now, my response is, I completely agree. A woman's place is wherever she wants it to be. But the trouble with your government policy is you've made it nearly impossible to stay at home if you want. So this is kind of the whole point. Government policy and the way modern economies are structured, it's incredibly hard for a couple to make ends meet unless they both work. And of course, the vision then is the home is empty by day and the children are in daycare. So the converse of women's places in the home is everybody's place is in work and the children's place is in daycare or in school and the home is empty. And as you say, this is not what most mothers want. Repeated opinion polls down the years in Ireland, and I think elsewhere also, shows most mothers want to spend more time at home with their children. This appalls feminists, by the way, because they do want a home to be empty during the day, and they do want all the children in daycare. So this is why these feminist groups are so pro universal subsidized daycare, because they want the home to be empty, because they feel equality can only be achieved if all men and all women work the same hours. So the home therefore has to be empty. But they keep, running into the stubborn fact that most mothers don't feel that way. And most mothers do want to spend more time at home with their children. And if they were economically free, that is what they would do. And that is the kind of sentiment that this article of the Irish Constitution currently supports. Now, it's very hard to achieve in practice because of the way modern economies are structured, but at least the aspiration is there. So actually, again, if it could be properly explained to people, what Article 41.2 is called is trying to do is give you the economic freedom to stay at home with your children if you want. Then the article would be retained. So again, the challenge is framing the debate as it ought to be debated, because most mothers would be on the side of the present provision if they understood properly what it's all about and it wasn't being continually misrepresented.
Yeah, the referendum is pretty polarized, isn't it? You've got choice A or choice B, and one's painted as really bad, and one's painted as much more in support of women, when in fact the opposite is true, really.
There was an opinion poll in the Sunday Independent, which I write for, at the weekend, and it was showing support to repeal the present article about mothers in the home is running at about 50%, and the rest are divided between don't know and vote no. Actually, that's not particularly comfortable for the government because despite all their propaganda, they're not as far ahead as you'd expect. So I think it could be beaten. We'd have to get a favourable bounce to the ball. Quite a lot will have to go our way, but it could actually be beaten. If I was the government, I'd much prefer to see myself above 60% at the moment.
And hopefully this will have a at least a tiny impact on making a positive difference there. Yeah, that's great. So that's the one proposed change to the Constitution.
Yeah.
There's another one, isn't there? Tell us about that.
Also in the Constitution is a section on the family. and marriage. So this is the one they changed back in 2015 to allow same-sex couples to marry. But now they're going after it again. Now, one of the arguments I used in the 2015 same-sex marriage debate, because it was all about marriage equality, as they framed it, that eventually you're going to have a family equality referendum. Because even though they were allowing same-sex marriage, the Irish Constitution still gives pride a place to marriage, and it gives it a special position in the Constitution. So, of course, the argument now is, well, okay, the state should not discriminate in favour of marriage. The Constitution did not, quote unquote, discriminate in favour of marriage. So we need a family equality referendum. So that's what they're trying to do. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that the family is based on marriage, that's the present wording, or on other durable relationships. So these things called durable relationships would be raised up to the same constitutional level as marriage. But while everybody can say what a marriage is, and when a marriage ends, nobody seems to know exactly what a durable relationship is. Like, what is that when it's at home, literally? And the government says, well, we don't really know. That'll be up to the courts to decide. So they're putting something that's deliberately very nebulous and ambiguous into the Constitution. So people don't know exactly what they're buying. So even with the same sex marriage one, you still knew what was going to happen. You were going to allow a same sex couple to marry. And everybody knows the day in which they're married, they kind of sign on the dotted line and they've entered into a legal contract. But these durable relationships involves nothing like that. So nobody knows what day do they begin, what day do they end, what rights do they have. And so I think what you're going to see over time is all kinds of unexpected things being named durable relationships and being raised to the same level as marriage. So certainly it's going to happen to cohabitation. So this is a kind of weird thing because a lot of couples cohabit specifically in order to avoid the rights and obligations of marriage. They want a no strings attached living arrangement. And the government is coming along and saying, actually, the Constitution is now going to turn cohabitation into a kind of marriage, because otherwise there's discrimination not to do it, even though the couple are specifically avoiding what marriage entails. There's been questions raised, including by a former justice minister who voted yes to same-sex marriage and yes to abortion, a fellow called Michael McDowell. He's one of the leading legal kind of brains in the country. And he says, well, ultimately, couldn't you also have a situation where you recognize polyamory? That is more than two adults in a sexual bond relationship, whatever you might want to call it. Because if that's a durable relationship and it involves more than two adults, what would be the Supreme Court's reason to say no to that? Um, and I'd love to hear from the government. What's your principal reason to say no to that? Because it's all about family equality. Why not polyamory? And then you've also had a raise by again people like the aforementioned former justice minister. So what happens? Somebody moves to Ireland from abroad, and he has three or four wives. So he could be coming from some part of Africa or the Middle East. So the Constitution at the moment only allows two people to marry. So wife two wife three would not be recognised as being married to him. But what it might do is court might say, okay, we can't recognise your second and third wives as being in a marriage with you, but we are going to recognise them as being in a durable relationship with you. And we're saying a durable relationship is constitutionally equal to marriage. So we just don't know what we're opening up here. The government admits it doesn't know, what it is, and you just hope that the public on March 8th will say, "We don't know what you're asking us to do here," and unless you can be clear, we're voting no.
And that's it. So the vote on a term that nobody really knows the meaning of, and let's just see what happens, shall we? That sounds completely bonkers.
But you see the way the government again is saying, well, the family in Ireland has changed, and a lot of people aren't married anymore, and a lot of children are not being raised inside marriage anymore. They say the out of wedlock birth rate is 40%, which is correct. But it's like in Britain in all these debates, like it's all put under the heading of family diversity, and family diversity is a good thing, and the more diverse, because diverse seems to mean all good things. And so if so the family is more diverse, then the family must be getting better and society must be getting better. So this is the kind of argument being used in favor of inserting this term durable relationships into the constitution. But it never seems to occur to them that well, is it really such a good thing if you've got 40% and rising children being born outside marriage? Because as we all know, what that means is fewer children having good contact with their fathers. That's simply a fact. So what A growing family diversity often means in practice is fewer children having day-to-day contact with both their mother and their father.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
and we know what that
love
means. We know that that leads to more crime. It leads to
can
more
do.
teen pregnancies. It leads to worse outcomes in education, more involvement with the criminal justice system, more money spent on social care and benefits and other sorts of support infrastructures. It doesn't lead to a better society, the stats would indicate.
Yeah, but you see, I mean, like even if you could somehow dismiss all the evidence that you're talking about, just as a simple matter of principle, it's surely a desirable state of affairs that a child has in its life a good mother and a good father. I mean, why would somebody want a society in which fewer children have both a good mother and a good father in their lives, and there's fewer and fewer fathers involved in children's lives, even if it had no ill effects? It's surely a good thing to have day-to-day contact with a good father as well as a good mother.
You and I would think, but then surely why would people be proposing this? I mean, what's behind all this? Is it purely populism, and that you've got a bunch of activists who make all the noise and embarrass politicians into doing things that they don't follow themselves, but they just do for expedience sake so they don't get hassled by noisy activists?
I think that's a big part of it. Like in Britain, we have an awful lot of these so-called non-government organizations that live off the public purse. And so a lot of these non-government organizations are really actually government front organizations. And so in the two debates here about the carers and about this thing, durable relationships, all the predictable NGOs that are funded by the government are coming out on the government side. And so you have the government kind of saying to them, um, we'd like you to campaign for this. And then we have the NGO saying to the government, we'd like you to make this change. So it's hard to know. There's a bit of a chicken and an egg here. Who is the initiative coming from? Is it coming from the government in the first place or the NGOs in the first place? Because they're so merged, it can be quite difficult to work out distinctions between the two of them. But there's no public demand for either of them. There's no grassroots campaign for either of them. It's a purely NGO and government led campaign. And unlike the two referendums I mentioned earlier, the one in 2015 about marriage and the one in 2018 about abortion, um, there's not a whole lot of enthusiasm, even from the usual suspects in favour of these two things. So you'll see no posters up in Ireland yet, even though we're only a month out, saying vote yes or no. So I think it's going to be a very low key campaign for both of them. Like, as I said, the two big ones previously. And I think it's going to be a low turnout. Now, it's hard to know who that will favour. So what you'll have is highly committed people from each side coming out to vote. Um, so I don't necessarily know how that's going to play out.
What are we supposed to do? What's the solution? Because the madness just keeps coming, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. Uh, Against common sense, against what everyone knows is in the best interests of wider society. What are we supposed to do?
I think it has to burn itself out, to be honest. I think when ideas become incredibly dominant and powerful, they kind of defeat themselves in the end because they just keep overreaching. So a good example of that is the trans issue, demanding that a biological male who says I'm a woman goes into changing rooms, for women and says I'm a pregnant man and all this sort of stuff, and that just kind of causes a kind of it's so against common sense. It causes people to start saying, "Hang on a minute, where's all this going?" But I think as well, it just becomes so damaging to society over time. You just can't keep on demolishing the family without causing a lot of damage. You just can't keep disguising it all as family diversity. So I think, and also look what's happening to fertility rates. People are going to see we're becoming a very old society. Um, there's an awful lot of non-intact families, if I can put it that way. We're doing something badly wrong. We got to reevaluate, and maybe to be a pro-natal, pro-family kind of social revolution. We could be several decades away from that. But unfortunately, like the likes of, I think, you and I, all we can do is kind of point towards a path back to common sense and keep that lit. But I think ultimately what's going to defeat what's going on now is not us. They themselves are going to beat themselves because what they're doing is so against human welfare ultimately.
Yeah, but what damage in the meantime, hey?
It's going to cause so much damage. And then people sit down and they reevaluate. Either that or we don't reevaluate and it just burns our society completely and it gets replaced by some new society.
Yeah,
It's happened
which
in history.
which if you look at people like so J.D. Unwin, 1930s anthropologist in Oxford, I mean, he talks about how societies thrive and how many societies, cultures over time have ceased to exist. And
Mm,
those who have ceased to exist are the ones who've abandoned the things you were talking about. They've abandoned the idea of monogamous marriage. They've abandoned the idea of premarital chastity. They abandon the idea of worship of a deity, whoever that deity is. And those three things lead to the death of a culture in
mm,
his research, and that's a little bit worrying. But let's
mm.
see if you and me and a few others can't do something to nudge that in a different direction. Yeah. Well, let's wait and see, David Quinn. We'll talk to you when it's over and we'll see what the
Thank
repercussions
you.
are and we'll take it from there. Thank you so much for your time and all the
Thank
best
you.
with your campaigning.
Thank you.